Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin, and today I'm joined by Clare Mulley.
Hi.
I don't know why I have this really bad habit of just saying people's names with a question mark at the end because I'm too scared I'm going to fuck it up.
That's why you're asking, though. I mean, I think that's okay. Like, you can, if you were Australian, you'd naturally ask everything like a question. So you could just say it's a form of vernacular, I guess.
I think it's just confidence. I don't know what it. Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's literally the easiest name to say, and I'm still kind of like, maybe.
It's like, although you're not, to be honest, sometimes people do check how you say. I think they think it's going to have a fancy French pronunciation, like Mulley, but I'm like, no, it's not. It rhymes with bully. So that's what it is. You know.
I would love to use that excuse, but I literally asked you 2 seconds ago, and you told me.
Cool.
Okay, Claire, this is obviously the second time joining us. Last time we'll touch on last time shortly because a few things came from that episode which I never expected. But firstly, let people know who haven't listened to the first one who you are, what you specialize in, and kind of maybe what we're going to touch on today.
Sure thing. That I am a DPhil student at the University of Oxford, studying Old Norse and Old Norse receptions, a bit of folklore as well, and storytelling, all the things that kind of mesh together. I mean, receptions is the study of how different authors have responded to Old Norse mythology and written their own texts based on them, whether that's, some people would say films are a form of receptions, and they are, but I mainly deal with stories, novels, poems, that kind of thing. And my specialism at the minute is women from the 20th century, generally writing in English, sometimes other languages, who have used Old Norse poetry, either have translated it in various ways or have used it in creative format for their own creative works. So it's sort of a study of how people think about mythology, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That sounds really interesting. And that's not even what we're going to talk about today.
Nope.
So we will pen that and come back to it.
Yeah, I sense this is gonna. I sense this. We could talk about an awful lot, but yeah, we will. Tonight is for the spookies.
The spookies it is. Last time I think I was at a Comic-Con and in a really old barn with creaky floors.
Yep. And a ghost.
Possibly a ghost that kept just cropping up. But not this time. I'm sat in my signature armchair. I've got my gin. Yep. I'm cultured now. I'm a gin man.
Very nice. Whereas I'm just drinking a beer. Well, mind you, it is vegan IPA, so swings and roundabouts.
Yeah. So, okay, we're going to talk about ghosts. One saga in particular.
Yep. Perhaps my favorite saga, which is called Eyrbyggja saga, the saga of, I mean, William Morris translated it as the mere dwellers, but it sort of refers to a bit, as far as I know, it refers to a sort of swampy patch of land or a part of a headland in Iceland, which it's a kind of a settlement story, and it reads like a sort of soap opera. So you get Laxdæla saga, Njál's saga, all the sagas. To some extent, they all read a bit like soap operas, but this one jumps about all over the place. And it's more to do with the inhabitants of a neighborhood and lots of them at once and the general conversion story. And there's one guy who's the head honcho and he's called Snorri Goði, and he's the local chieftain. But apart from him, different people crop up regularly as well. And it's kind of like Icelandic Coronation Street is the main way I would describe it. Mm-hmm. But it's got a lot of ghosts in it, a lot of different ghosts. And I thought it'd be fun to have a bit of a spooky storytelling session tonight and engage with two particular ghost threads. Because last time we talked about the witch thread, we talked about the battle between Gerida and Katla. And some of the action tonight does occur as a result of Katla's curse.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a continued sequel to the action. Some of it's not related at all, but it's also sort of a revenge motif for it. The idea of a reckoning for something you've done.
Mm-hmm. So if you haven't listened to the first episode, maybe hit pause, go back and listen to the first episode, which is a lot of fun as well. Yeah, check that out and then jump back into this and you can follow on from there, I guess. And I mean, I say, am I right in remembering? I remember too well because this has become a theme for me that there was a pig ghost sat on some ash.
You know there was, because there's one behind you. Would you like to talk about the fan art which occurred from last session?
I mean, sure, why not? So
why not?
There was a pig sat on some ash. There was a ghost. Somehow that turned into me dressed as a pig sat on some ash, which Sophie, our lovely artist, did a nice little sketch of me, framed it, sent it me. Loved it. Perfect. Then Caden decided to make a meme of me as a pig sat on some ash. And this thing doesn't seem to be stopping. So,
no, please don't stop, viewers. That when I'm in the library doing whatever boring ass thing I have to do of a day or replying to my emails, memes are what keep me alive. So the more Piggy Dan memes I get, the more I'll be happy. Or any other memes you care to create, really.
Did you see the latest one?
I did. This is the one with it actually is a photograph of your face, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, no. So there's the new one of me and Jonas. Because
yes, I did.
Me and Jonas, we in 2 episodes ago, we had a nice. I think it was 3 episodes ago now. We had a nice little bromance. We had a good chat.
What do you mean just last episode?
Pardon?
You always have a bromance.
We do, yes. Yeah, that's true. So that's a kid, and again, nicely made a meme of Lady and the Tramp with my face, Jonas's face, looking lovingly at each other with the signature spaghetti.
Slurping goat intestines, yes. Yeah. That was a visual, shall we say.
Creativity at its finest.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I really enjoyed that one. The thing is with ghost stories, you just get so many good memes. I mean, strictly speaking, that wasn't a ghost story. That was just a magic story. But still, you get a lot of troll stuff and shape changing and all the amazing things that Otter turned into. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's definitely still some room for Distaff Dan. Dan turned into a distaff. Dan turned into a goat.
Okay.
Doesn't just have to be a pig and an ash heap.
I see the theme here. What ghost can we turn Dan into?
Yeah, or what weird object can we turn Dan into? Sophie, shall I load up Photoshop now? Maybe yes.
Probably. Okay, if you do want to enjoy, that's going to streamline me into my housekeeping that I wanted to say. So if you do want to check out the memes, head over to our Facebook group. We've got a Facebook page and we've got a Facebook group where our little community posts all sorts of strange things from the episodes. It's a lot of fun. I absolutely love that group. And you also get all the updates in there as well. And the other thing I want to say is that we've completely revamped our Patreon. So over the last month, I've spent a lot of time looking at making it more affordable and also making sure that we can deliver on the rewards every month, because obviously over the last year, it's no secret that behind the scenes it's been chaotic and we haven't been able to keep up with hitting those rewards. We've had a bunch of patrons that have stuck by us and, kept the subscriptions going, even though they weren't really getting the things that they deserved and the things they were paying for. So we've restructured it and it's going to be much easier, simpler, but also hopefully beneficial for the people who do sign up. So the lowest tier now is just £3 a month. It's literally 10p a day, and you're going to get a bonus episode every single week. So what we're going to do is going to have the guests stay behind. So today it's going to be you, Claire, and we're going to do a Q&A session with the patrons. You can either submit your question live or before the show, you can put them on Patreon or on our Discord server. You're also going to get all the episodes ad-free, early access to all the episodes. You're going to have to watch live, have the live chat. Again, you're going to have access to the Discord server and early access to some merch, which we're working on. And I came up with one of the designs today, and I'm so happy with it. I cannot wait to release the next lot of merch. We've got some really cool stuff going on there. And then the second tier is £6 a month. And what this gets you is the story time episodes with Jonas Lorentzen. So we've agreed to do 2 of these a month. So I don't know if you've ever seen the Storytime episodes, Claire, but they are a lot of fun.
No, I still need to tune into those. I mean, I love any story time, especially when people do voices.
Okay, you're gonna love these then.
I mean, to be honest, it's what I used to do as a job. So I kind of miss story time in a way.
Okay.
And that's something I would like to see.
Well, you may have to make a special appearance if that's what you used to do as a job.
Can I? Oh, goody. Yeah, yes. I'd enjoy mucking about with you guys and doing silly voices. That'd be really cool.
So yeah, Jonas is the narrator in the sagas. Basically, we pick a saga and we go through it. It may take a couple of weeks to get all the way through it, so he's split up into different episodes. And he just, Jonas, he just does a whole range of. He's a natural performer. He does a whole range of different voices, different characters. It's a lot of fun. We have a good laugh. And also, if you sign up, you get all the ones we've done before and all the back catalogue. And then the highest tier is £10, and you're going to get 20% off any Nordic Mythology podcast merch we do. And also, you're going to get 20% off any Horns of Odin or anything off the Horns of Odin website. So that's kind of the highest tier, but you're going to be able to get it back through discounts. So yeah, I just wanted to shout those out because, like I say, we spend a lot of time on it, and it keeps the show going. It means that, again, we can get Jonas to commit, we can get Ron working behind the scenes, Alyssa doing social media, Matt doing the artwork. There's a whole little team at the podcast now, and they all need paying. So sign up if you can. So yeah, let's jump into ghost stories.
Yeah, ghost stories. So we have 2 ghost stories for your delectation tonight. And I'm just going to, if I do any reading, I'm going to read in English. Because I do not know where my Old Norse copy of the saga has gone, and I'm too tired to read out and then translate. Okay. So that's just the way we'll go. So listeners from last episode may remember, but I'll do a little recap. Do you remember the words of Katla when she died? So she was stoned to death in disgrace because it was found out that she had not only troll-ridden a man, but she'd deceived a lot of men. She'd aided her son in cutting off someone's hand. She'd generally been a very disruptive influence. Mm-hmm. And someone said when her son died, he died at the gallows quite quickly, and she died by stoning, and said, "We think you have an evil mother." And she gives the clap back of, well, if I have anything to do with it, I think you have an evil father, and I think it's going to get worse, essentially. One of the men called Arnkel, who's quite a nice law-abiding citizen, has a father called Thorolfur, and his nickname is Thorolf Lamefoot. He's got obviously a bad foot, does what it says on the tin, and he's like the worst neighbor possible. He's that grumpy old man who is forever the bane of the council or the bane of his neighbors. He kind of steals stuff. He goes over boundaries. He complains about other people. And it would take too long to say all the things he does. But he's a real meaty character. So the long and short of it is that he gets more and more bad-tempered and double-crossing. Eventually, he gets double-crossed in some land by Snorri Gothi, who's quite smart. Not the most sympathetic character, actually, but pretty clever. People tend to go to him for solving problems. And Thorolfur essentially dies of disappointment in a way, or you get the sense that his disappointment and his disillusionment over the way he's been done it gives him a knock to his pride. And this makes him more vulnerable to, he's already quite elderly by this time, and this just sort of makes him give up the ghost, or rather everything but. So this is I'll tell you how he dies. So it says, father and son parted. Uncle's just told him essentially to F off. I'm not going to help you anymore. You've done yourself in. And Thorolf Lamefoot went home and felt exceedingly dejected about the turn matters had taken and about being thwarted in everything. I'd like to say he has stirred a lot of shit. So he's feeling sorry for himself. He arrived home in the evening and spoke with no one. He sat down in the high seat and did not eat anything all evening. This is somewhat a reflection of Eötl's saga, as some people, if they've read it, might recognize. This is the pining away. He remained sitting there after all the others had gone to bed, and in the morning when they got up, Thorolf was still sitting there and was dead. Then the mistress of the house sent a man to Arnkel to inform him of the passing of Thorolf. Okay. When they came there, Arnkel learned for certain that his father was dead, sitting in the seat of honor. But all the people in the house were terrified because they all thought there was something uncanny about his death. So if someone dies standing or sitting up, that's trouble. That's sign that, that's a sign that you're going to have an unquiet rest and perhaps come back. So they try to do everything in their power here.
Okay. If you get stabbed with a sword while standing, does that count? Or is it?
It's never actually, I can't think of an example of that. And perhaps more experienced saga readers or people who specialize in others will tell me otherwise. I think this is nothing to do with death by combat. This is to do with how someone passes away. And I think it's also mixed up in the idea of bad feeling. So there seems to be a formula whereby if someone dies with some disappointment on their hands or some feeling of anger, I mean, I think in many cultures, that's a sign that something's going to go wrong.
Yeah, it's a sense of like things being unfinished, unsettled. It's just not peaceful, is it?
That's the idea. I think it's more, I'd like to add the caveat, whatever I say, I'm still researching this. I'm not a professor of 30 years. I'm still a baby. So sometimes there are gaps in my knowledge, but as far as I know, based on my own experience of the reading, I think it is a sense of the unfinished passing that is important here, and a sense of his troublesomeness in life. Mm-hmm. So the two of them combine together pretty well, and he's just sort of sat there and pined away, which is a bit weird. Like you'd expect someone either to die violently because they're taking some kind of action, or to go to bed and die, or die of sickness. But he just sort of randomly dies, essentially having refused one meal. This doesn't linger for a week. So it is weird when you think about it.
It's very sudden. I mean, there's no illness, there's no damage, no harm. It's just...
it's almost like he just decides to give up. Or he's so overtaken with his own temper. I mean, it's not, who knows? We talked last time about a stroke being exacerbated by stress. I think a modern medic might look at the story and go, well, maybe he had an underlying condition. And maybe he did. But for the narrative purposes, it's very strange for the house and for the servants and everybody, because as far as they know, he was just sitting up after they'd gone to bed. And then they come down in the morning, he's still there. And there's no apparent reason.
That's what I was just thinking, how we're looking at a time where medicine was very different than it is today. And, things like strokes, heart attacks, probably they're not understood how we understand them. So you're going to look for a reason as to why these things happen. It's probably you're naturally going to look at the last thing that happened, I guess, as well. So if something stressful has just happened and then somebody dies, you're kind of going to look at that and go, that must be the reason. Of course it is.
Yeah, and it might not be wrong. It's just not the full explanation. So while we don't have, you could say easily, oh, he died because he had stress. But if you don't know about heart attacks, then that's the whole truth. But here, I mean, I don't know. I think the idea is, I mean, bear in mind also, we're dealing with narrative patterning here. So this isn't entirely true and isn't entirely fiction. This is something that somebody has laid out to make a point. And part of the story here, this is a constant thread in the story, in the sense that Snorri Gothi and certain people are meant to inherit this land. And it's a book that seems to have been written, or a work rather, not a book. We don't really have, before the printing press, it's very risky to say book. But it's a work that's been written in the sense that it's trying to justify or bend a historical narrative so that their supremacy seems justified or seems to make sense. So it's sort of propaganda. It's not the fullest propaganda, but it kind of is. So Thorolf is a classic case of a plot device to ensure that the right people come out on top or are seen to come out on top. And this is a problem that has to be overcome. And it's also a sign of, I mean, this halfway through this saga, you get Christianity made law in Iceland, and that's around 1000 AD, due to a parliamentary decision. And so what you've got is this sort of hinterland of a land that is officially Christian, but it's still shaking off the trappings of more superstitious beliefs, or according to a Christian, more superstitious beliefs. It's a blended narrative. And so hence all the ghosts are very interesting for that reason. And as we said before, there's a sense of the past being put in its place. So by paying tribute and telling is a good story, you then have a natural ending to the story, and the idea is it's separated off very nicely from the present, or what for the scribe was the present. So I think that's Thorolf for you. So let me tell you how they buried him. So Arnkell went into the kitchen, and from there along the dais behind Thorolf, behind his father, where his corpse is, he warned everyone not to approach him from the front until the last service to the dead had been performed. So they're guarding everybody. And the last service to the dead is the closing of the dead person's eyes, nostrils, and mouth. And to know, I think, I know about the closing of the eyes. I imagine it's something to do with the idea of something not escaping from a natural orifice. But you'd have to ask a burial expert for that. So Arnkell took Thorolf by the shoulders, and he had to exert all his strength to get him down from the high seat. The inevitably rigor mortis will have set in anyway. But they will see that also as a sign, I imagine. Then he wrapped a cloth. Yeah.
So when they say high seat,
the high seat of the hall. Yeah.
How high are we talking? Because when you say getting him down, I feel like I've got this image of someone like 6 feet in the air, like just trying to, and then the body just falling on him in this like slapstick manner.
We're not talking Baywatch. We're talking, like the lifeguard chair. We're just talking like, in most, if you think of your typical picture of a medieval hall or homestead, you will have the high seat, which is basically up on a raised platform, and it's like a throne. So it's the idea is the master of the hall sits there. A bigger version for kings, smaller version for a chieftain. Or just the owner of the farm in this case. So he's in the big chair, and he has to be dragged out, essentially. So after that, he wrapped a cloth around Thorolf's head and prepared the body according to the custom of that time. Now, why would we want to hide the eyes? I hear you quite. Oh, can anyone guess that? See if anyone in the chat can say. They're all very quiet for one.
They have, yeah.
Who knows? Put 2 coins. I don't think you put coins on the eyes, as far as I think that's Greek. But again, you'd have to ask the burial expert. It's evil. It's to do with the evil eye. It's the same reason why Geirridr wrapped Katla's head in a sealskin bag, so she couldn't do any bad magic while they were there. So to save people from the evil eye, because there's been something uncanny about the death. After that, he had the wall broken through behind him and had him pulled out through the opening.
No, what? Okay. Wait a minute.
So this is to prevent the ghost of the dead man from entering the house. So if you take them out through the door, which is always open and which is very obvious, the idea is that they'll know where to come back in if they fancy a bit of haunting. So if you take the body out through the wall and then close the wall up, the ghost doesn't know how to get in.
I feel like the builder came up with this. Whoever was building houses, repairing walls, came up with this because he's like,
I know a good idea.
Everybody destroy a wall when somebody dies so I can come and fix it. Because other than that, I don't understand why you would do that. Like, what?
Well, you don't want a ghost, do you?
But where does that come from? I don't understand.
I am not sure whether, I mean, I'm not sure whether that's primarily Icelandic, it's Scandinavian. But yeah, I imagine it makes sense because if you really believe a ghost might come back or someone might rest quiet, the idea is to naturally, I mean, you get
No.
you get this, I think, with a lot of cultures with ghosts. The idea being that the ghost has some sense of how to come back, or there's an idea that they know the entrance to the house, or that you want to prevent them from taking the logical route in. Which is why, I mean, have you heard of witch bottles?
I have not.
So people putting an empty glass bottle enclosed by a wall with the opening to the neck of the bottle on the outside. So if a witch is trying to enter your house, they will mistake that small orifice for the natural entrance. And they will go in there and get trapped in the bottle rather than coming into the room and harming you.
People were weird, weren't they? People were weird.
I think people just are weird. But
you know what that reminds me of? Have you ever heard of when people put conkers in the corner of the room?
I haven't heard of that one, funnily enough.
So people put conkers in the corners of the rooms because apparently it scares off spiders. And I feel like this is the exact same thing. It's just something that people tell themselves to make themselves feel better. They're like, I'm scared of a witch, so I'm going to put this bottle outside. And of course, the witch is going to think the mouth of the bottle is the house. So she's going to go in there instead of coming inside.
I mean, yeah, as there was a comment on the chat here, which was really quite pertinent. So Sophie says, yes, witches have an IQ of 2. Yeah, and if you pay attention to clerical documents, yeah, they do have an IQ of 2. Like for all the easy remedies to witches, you think they were kind of stupid. But yeah, I think you might have a point there. I think there's a certain placebo effect, which is that people decide to do something just on the off chance. It's the same with this. I think in Italy, and I think it's Italy and certain Mediterranean countries, they cover up a mirror after a person dies, and that's something to do with. And that's something to do with. I don't entirely know. Someone may comment on the chat in this, but it's to do with the veil between the worlds being quite thin to prevent anything coming through the mirror, or there's some kind of idea of a parallel world there, which people don't want to interfere. And it's the same with, say, Halloween, where the veil between the worlds is meant to be very thin. And, you're meant to take care because supernatural is more likely and something could make an entrance. There's quite a physical aspect to ghosts about entering and barring the way for them or inviting them. The coins over the eyes of a past person in Greek tradition in response to Elizabeth are a payment for the ferryman to ferry you across the river Styx. For all I know, there's some similar tradition, and I don't think that's a Scandinavian tradition. But again, that's one to look up. My specialism really is ghost stories. When it comes to the actual ritualistic side of burying or the artifacts, I'm far less experienced. I just know what people talk about sometimes. Yeah, it's Sophie says, I've seen people wipe their hand across a mirror to close the barrier. Yeah. So there is an idea of entrances and exits and entrances to the other world, ghosts knowing exit. And there's stories also, fairy stories too, about things coming down chimneys. I think openings are very important in that sense.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But, okay, so let's get back to
the story. They've done all the right things.
You say the right things, but I'm never going to say that knocking a wall down to take somebody out. Just put a bag over their head. Makes a loud banging noise.
They don't walk the whole wall down. They just make a little hole and pass the corpse through and then close it up again. And if you've got a plaster wall made of horse dung and straw and thing, or if it's just a few loose bricks, that's not so hard.
You've never been a builder, have you? Because it's not easy to just knock a hole.
I'm more practical than you think, but yeah, it's if you have a couple of people to help you, I mean, you consider really how your average person isn't necessarily tiny, but they're not much compared. If they're lying on their back, it's essentially like building a corpse letterbox, isn't it? And you're just posting them through. It's not the worst thing.
big, because obviously we're talking about wooden houses, and
No, we're not.
are we not?
We're not talking of wooden houses. No, I mean, maybe here and there, but I think that you're as likely to get a stone cottage as anything else. Or actually, maybe people should comment on this one, but it's not to be guaranteed that the wall is made of wood. I would imagine it would have to be a little bit hard. I imagine them built out of lots of blocks, a bit like a dry stone wall.
That's even worse. That's even harder to put back right. But okay, let's move on.
What the story says. I didn't write it.
No, absolutely not. They've done this crazy thing. They've made a human letterbox.
They've made a corpse letterbox. They've posted this nasty man out of it. Yeah, they posted Dad through the wall. Dad's a bugger, and now he's gone. And his death was weird. So all right, well, we don't want him coming back, so let's get him out. So then the oxen were harnessed to a sled. Thorolf was laid in it, and they brought him up to Thorsardala, and it was not without a struggle before they reached the place where he was to be buried. So a hard journey. It's never stated whether it's just a hard journey or there's some natural hesitation on the part of the oxen, but it's left to stand there. There's, again, build up. Sagas are par excellence the masters of build up, and every detail counts. They buried Thorolf securely and heaped stones over him. And after that, Uncle rode home to Kvam and took possession of all the property there which his father had owned. And he stayed there for 3 days, and nothing of particular moment happened during this time. And then he went home. And that's the end of the story.
Okay.
But wait, no, it isn't.
Where's the ghost?
The next chapter discusses the fairly spectacular haunting. And I think it's too good to paraphrase, so I'm just going to read it to you.
Okay.
Here we go. After the death of Thorolf Lamefoot, it seemed to many that there was something uncanny out of doors as soon as the sun got low. Add to this that as the summer wore on, people became aware that Thorolf was not lying quietly. So they could never be out of doors in peace after the sun set. Again, classic. Besides that, the oxen which had drawn Thorolf became troll-ridden. You see, it wasn't just a natural slowness of journey. His spirit was affecting them. All the cattle which came near the grave of Thorolf went mad and bellowed until they died. The shepherd at Kvam was often chased home by Thorolf. So he's clearly up and about.
He's a pesky one.
He's a pesky one. He really is a pest. He's as much of a pest in life and death, really, equally. In fact, he's more of a pest in death because he's strong. He's a dragon. It happened one evening during the autumn at Kvam that neither the shepherd nor the sheep came home. In the morning, a search was made, and the shepherd was found dead a short distance from the grave. He was black and blue all over, and every bone in him was broken.
Okay.
Yep. So, again, classic detail of someone who may become undead. This happened with Grettis Saga and the troll character of, oh goodness me, I've forgotten his name. He's the equivalent of Grendel, and many people say it's the same sort of figure intertextually.
Okay.
Glaumer, that's his name. He's got big glowing eyes, and he was officially a slave and a shepherd before he became a revenant troll. But when he dies in a fight with another ghost, and that's what makes him into a ghost. And they find him black and blue all over and with a lot of broken bones. So this is a sign he's not going to lie quietly either. So that he was buried near Thorolf's grave mound. But of all the sheep which had been in that valley, some were found dead, and the rest ran up into the mountains and were never found again. And if birds settled on the grave of Thorolf, they fell down dead. Major toxic spirit going on.
Absolutely.
They need some sage burnt over this spot. It is. I mean, that's not what they're going to do, obviously, because this is a bit more of a Christian narrative. So things became so bad that no man dared graze his livestock up in the valley. Often during the night, the people at the farm heard loud noises outside, and they also often heard how the house was being ridden. And do you remember about that from last time? The idea that a troll will sit on a roof and make a big clattery noise. And when winter came, Thorolf often appeared inside the house at the farm, and he bothered the mistress of the house most of all. So it doesn't say exactly what he did, but clearly there's an element of some kind of sexism or sexual violence, I think. Many a person took harm from this. So they're not just scared. If his spirit gets to them, they start sickening or they start having a bad physical effect. The mistress herself went almost mad. It ended with the mistress of the house dying from these apparitions. So that's how bad it got.
It's causing real harm.
Yeah, this is not just a bit of walking up and down going woo. This is a lot of violence.
Particularly because, cattle, livestock, they weren't cheap things. They were very valuable to the people. So the loss of all the cattle, the animals, it's a huge sort of strike on the farm.
Yeah, it's huge. If you're in any country which has very extreme weather conditions and most of your livelihood is farming, then anything that gets to your animals is bad news. And it's why so much of Icelandic folklore focuses on cream and butter, milk. One of the fights they had was over straw. Thorolf was stealing straw from somebody. And obviously, that's animal food and bedding. Yeah. So it's a problem. And even small things like land disputes are huge because ultimately that land is what your sheep graze on, or there's chance that your sheep might be mistaken for someone else's if they stray off the land. And there's a couple of territorial disputes take place in Saga as well over somebody's sheep eating somebody else's grass. And on the surface, it's kind of funny because it's kind of like those neighborhood disputes you have you hear between adults as kids, like someone, your tree's touching my fence. And it's way more serious than that in this context.
Well, you say that, but people.
Oh, I see.
But you say that, but people still get ridiculously annoyed over things as trivial as, like you say, somebody's tree being too high or leaning over into somebody's garden. Like those often turn into physical conflicts that people just let it bother them so much, and they just become toxic.
I mean, sometimes I think it's from lack of occupation. Like, there's definitely not everybody. Sometimes there's a general hazard or someone's worried that the tree's going to blow down, and then you do need to take care of it. But, I mean, I'll never forget when my mom got her new fence done years and years ago. I mean, our neighborhood's relatively big. And I remember someone from up the road on a hill complaining. He'd never spoken to us in his life. But the next thing we knew, we had a note through our letterbox saying the fence was spoiling his view. And this view was of other houses.
Yeah.
So either he'd been perving on somebody a few doors down with his binoculars. But he was really pissy about it. And I just remember thinking, get a life. Even at, 12 years old, I was like, what the hell are you on about? Like, you've got a view over the rest. There's a lovely field out the back and you can see that fine. Like, what's wrong with you? But,
unfortunately, it seems something that happens quite often where
it really is.
I don't know if it's like a jealousy thing or what it is, or some people, they just don't ever want to see the good for other people. It's like you have something nice, so I have to try and take that away from you somehow because I'm a miserable prick.
Yeah, and I think it's, territorial is the word. I think it's what's mine is mine. You are spoiling my view. You are in my space. And it's like, sometimes it's fair enough, but sometimes it's, oh, for God's sake. And you tend to find the kind of people who don't get bothered by it so much are the people who have a life, in my humble opinion. So it's, it just comes, what I really love is when it comes up on Reddit feeds, like someone's being a real, you get those am I the asshole stories, and you get to read about, am I the asshole for building a fence? Like, no, you're not. It just, because someone's got tremendous hate mail or someone's pranked them or they've pranked some. Or sometimes the real funny stories are where someone actually has been really antisocial and they prank them for it. And I kind of find those stories really funny.
They're always good. It's always good when somebody gets a little bit of karma.
Yeah. I think Oh, one word in the chat that has popped up. Historical Karens. Karen is a very loaded word, isn't it? I mean, I get it in a way, and I do like it. I just wish there was a word for the male equivalent. Is there a male equivalent for a Karen? Because I think a lot of people are good at, a Chad. Oh, good. Okay. Kyle or Chad. Excellent. No, that solves my dilemma, because I think the thing is both genders can be whiny, horrible, bitchy people. And I think for a long time we didn't have the equivalent. But now we do. Excellent. So we have Kyle or Chad. So Thorolf in life was definitely a Chad, I would say.
Still, it does stink of a Chad.
He stinks of it. So now he's a dead Chad, which is even worse. So now they decide to do something about it. But before they do, it gets worse. So he's riding the house, people flee from the farm, and now Thorolf began to haunt the valley to such an extent that all the farms there were deserted, all the farms. And his haunting increased so greatly in violence that he killed some men and put others to flight, and all who had died were seen with him when he was haunting. So basically, whenever he turns up, he has this stream of dead people with him that he's also killed. So it's not just now a single haunting, it's a mass haunting, and it accumulates. It's like Night of the Living Dead. So people made a great outcry about the trouble. It seemed to them that it was up to Uncle to deal with it. Poor old Uncle, who has done no wrong and happens to have a really shitty father through no fault of his own. I really feel for this dude. I do. So Uncle invited all those to stay with him who liked it better there than elsewhere. Because the interesting thing is, Thorolf would never haunt any place where Uncle was present. So clearly there is some respect in death for family members, and his ghost to acknowledge that he can't harm his own child.
Okay, that's interesting. Is it just him that he lives alone, or is it
just Uncle? Yeah. I think it's at any place where he's present. So
do you think that's a respect thing or a fear thing, that he maybe thinks that he can do something to stop it?
I don't think it's fear. I think it's taboo / respect. For me, it's like, I guess it's never fully explained, but I suspect it's the familial tie, a sense of even with the dead, some sense of duty perhaps lingers, and he's aware that I can't harm my own kid.
Okay.
Although, he was such an unpleasant old man in life that actually you wouldn't have been surprised if he had harmed his own kid. But he's surprisingly decent about this. So Uncle has people to stay with him because he's realized the trick that, if they're all with him, the ghost won't come there. So he's probably got a lot more house guests than he wants. So fearful were people. Oh no, it also says there was never it says that none of the ghosts with him would harm anybody either when Uncle was present.
Okay.
So people were really frightened of the hauntings, and nobody dared to travel about during the winter, even on business. So it's very linked to the light. Bad things happen in the dark, always. But when winter passed, there came a fine spring, and when the frost was out of the ground, Uncle sent a man to Karlstead, to the sons of Thorbrand, and asked them to go along with him to take Thorolf away out of Thorsdale and to find him a burial place elsewhere. So long story short, there's a bit of toing and froing over whose job it is and whether they're entitled to do this deed or whether they are actually obliged. But in the end, what they do is they remove him from the burial mound he was in. So classic Draugr, they opened the mound and they found the body of Thorolf there, undecomposed. Is the word. I'm not even sure that's a word. I presume it is because it made the editing, but I've never heard it before. It's still not decomposed, and it's really hideous to look at. And this is classic ghost. The body hasn't rotted properly. So we've seen other stories like this before. I mean, any fans of Dracula will see the resemblance to vampires that the Icelandic undead hold as well. The real difference is they don't drink blood. And they're killed slightly differently, and there's none of this stuff with garlic. But was he just composed? That makes him sound calm then. Yeah. And yes, this is like every other Witcher 3 side quest. Yes, it is. I fully concur. So they take the body, they lift him out of the grave, they laid him on the sledge, and they harness 2 strong oxen to it. That didn't work very well last time. No. I really feel sorry for the oxen of this story. I really do. It's cruelty to cows. So they dragged him up Ulfarsfell Ridge, and by then the oxen were spent. Others were hitched up, and they dragged him up on the ridge. And Arnkell intended to move him to the Valdishofti promontory and bury him there. So geography-wise, this won't mean much to most of you. It doesn't mean that much to me, but the idea is this is some distance away, and they feel they've got a bit further to go. But when they came to the edge of the hill, the oxen went mad. They broke away, ran off down the ridge, and headed out along the mountainside. And they basically, by the time they caught them again, they were completely exhausted. So that's taken as a sign they shouldn't just go any further. They should just make good and bury him where they could while the going was good. And he was so heavy by then that they were scarcely able to move him at all. Classic Draugr body. They often talk about the corpses swelling to massive proportions, as you'll see later with another undead. So they took him to a little headland nearby and buried him there. And that place has since been called Beigefortshofti, Lamefoot's Headland. And later, Arnkell had a wall built across the headland above the burial mound so high that nothing could get over it except a bird in flight. Traces of it can still be seen. And there Thorolf lay quietly as long as Arnkell was alive.
Okay. So does he come back? Is there a part 2?
There is a part 2. There is indeed a part 2.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts so far then?
The skeptic in me is trying to look for real world explanations for things that happen. So you said about the house being troll ridden, and obviously Iceland is known for its extreme weather. So could this be a case of it just been a horrible night, the wind's blowing, the snow's coming down, the hail?
Very likely.
Particularly nasty.
Yeah, so you are of the ghost busting thinking. Yeah, I think most people listening to this story would be fairly convinced that it was probably partly bad weather, bad feeling. Although there is some thinking that sometimes you can have an unquiet spirit. I mean, I'll never forget running into some gamekeepers in Leeds. They were all, it was incredible. They were all coming back on a train from a conference, and they were all taking care of this big spot of land up near Halifax. And they told me a couple of stories which, you get the feeling people aren't lying to you. Like they could have been pulling my leg, but they really, they clearly wanted to talk about it. One of them said that a friend of theirs had been in an old cottage up on the hills, and he'd spotted a figure circling around a spot in the floor in his living room, something that was clearly a ghost or some kind of spirit. And it was just standing looking at this spot in the floor. And when they dug up the floor, they found an unmarked grave. And once they buried that body in a churchyard, then the ghost didn't come back. So yeah, I think there's a lot of wishful thinking, and people want to see ghosts and presences more. I think the older I get, suddenly the less cynical I get. I've heard a lot of very sensible people tell stories like this, and obviously not all of them have seen a figure, but some of them have. And you just think, well, there's certainly something to investigate. I'm sort of, I think I'm an agnostic on the scale. I think a lot of people see things when they want to see things, but people like my grandmother have had odd experiences, and friends of mine have talked about fairly sensible friends of theirs who've had experiences. And some people can see things. Other people speak of people who've apparently seen something in their presence and just assumed it was another person going about their business. And then when they've spoken to somebody who was there later on, that other person says, "Oh, who were you talking to?" And it turns out they've been talking to what appears to be a ghost, and the other person just couldn't see it. I don't know. I mean, I imagine the chat people will have a lot to share about their own stories. But I'd like to put that out there. I think sometimes it is trickery of the weather, sometimes it is atmospheric, and sometimes it's our own stresses. But I think sometimes there's occasional I imagine with this story in particular, it's quite fantastical. But maybe there was a certain truth. Maybe there's a certain truth in that people thought that this very maddening, grumpy, hostile old person maybe did have a bit of a presence after he was dead, or things seemed to go wrong and they put it down to him, or there was a sort of unquiet feeling about the house.
That would be my thinking. So here's an idea. Let's get into personal ghost stories after the show.
Okay.
We'll do that in the Q&A after. We can talk about like our personal feelings.
I think that'd be a great idea.
People can share their ghost stories. I can tell you my thoughts on ghosts, and we can get all to that, because I love ghosts. I love ghosts programs.
Love ghosts.
I love all of this stuff. So we can really get into that after. When it comes to this story in particular, I think you're right in that when somebody's an asshole in life and then they die, and then when bad things happen, it's easy to just go, that motherfucker is still doing it now. Like, he's still fucking with us. And particularly, especially when it's things that we can explain today, but maybe they couldn't explain 1,000 years ago. They didn't have the science answer to it.
I think so. I mean, just as we can have events colored by our moods, I mean, if you are head over heels in love or in very high spirits, a small accident can seem very funny. If you've already had a terrible day or just want to cry, then the smallest thing can make you think the universe is against you. And I think it's something similar with ghosts. I've no doubt that a lot of saga material is very possibly based on quite accurate detail. And even if some of it's made up for narrative purposes, then the main impression I get from this story is there was a person of ill repute living around that area, and he had a very bad reputation and would have left a bad smell. And it would have been very easy to attach uneasy weather and a bad winter, because all of this is happening around winter. And winter is a bugger of a time for seeing things or feeling depressed or not having enough to eat. And all that can make you see more into things.
And also, the darkness is there. We all know ghosts only come out in night. They only come out in the dark. So obviously, winter, the prolonged nights. It's and you can see. Honestly, you can see anything in the dark if you put your mind to it. It doesn't mean nothing's there, but I think any time that the fantasy gets more to be a fantasy and not a real thing, let's just assume there is some evidence of ghosts or spirits and people have experienced something real, but that means there are also times when it's not real. I think in the sagas, there's a very good point in the chat here. The ghosts in some literature definitely don't just stick to nighttime. And that's fair to say. You do get some modern ghost stories and accounts where the ghost doesn't just stick to nighttime. But I think it says a lot that in the sagas, particularly, a lot of supernatural events happen at night. And that's because night's the time of imagining and deprivation of light. And you see more than you would see in the day, and it's easier to get tricked and spooked. And if you've ever been in a wooden house overnight by yourself, which I have, the door doesn't lock properly, or there's wind in the chimney, or you can hear every creak of the wood outside. If a fox sniffs at your doorstep, or even if there's a small shudder of wind, it sounds like something dying. And it's, on the one hand, it's incredibly thrilling, but on the other hand, it's not a good thing to do if you're already in a bit of a vulnerable state of mind. So I'm not surprised that this is happening at all. Absolutely. Okay, so why did taking him out through the wall not work? I don't think I forgot about that. They took him out the wall. Why did it not work?
I don't know. Maybe he was too malevolent a spirit. I mean, bear in mind, he hasn't, they did that as a precaution. And precautions don't always work.
Okay. They ruined
a really bad analogy came into my head just then, and I'm not going to say it.
Go for
Protection doesn't always work. Occasionally you get a faulty condom.
They do write it on the box.
Yes, they do.
Famously discovered in Friends. They write it on the box.
Yeah. So if a condom can be, I mean, it's poor logic, really. If a condom can be faulty, so can a wall protection. But, precautions are precautions. They are to give us the best possible chance of something not happening, and they don't always work. And in this case, my feeling is, I mean, he's haunting the valley, so it's more than just him coming into the house by now. I imagine there was a feeling that some ghosts would just want to come home if they were a bit unquiet.
Okay.
So if it was Granddad, and Granddad wasn't particularly a bastard, but you don't really want the ghost of Granddad tapping at your window and wandering in the front door and sitting down, because you don't know, there's nothing to be done, and it's upsetting. And it's probably bad luck in some ways, but it's just, I imagine that's a fairly commonplace desire to keep the dead where the dead belong. But in this case, this is more than just the dead. This is a real bastard.
Yeah, that's a good point. He's clearly committing awful acts to animals as well, which is the biggest sin in my eyes.
I think it's more his aura as much as anything, like birds flying over his mouth, it's like a toxic, it's almost like a nuclear zone. I think it's just the feel of the place as much as anything.
Okay, what's next? Tell me some more ghost stories.
Part two, let's find it. So you notice the catch is that he doesn't harm anyone. He's put in a distant place, and as long as Arnkel is alive, then he's not going to do anything else. But, and there's a big but, Arnkels can't stay alive forever. So I'm just, you have a little talk amongst yourselves, but it's really Dan talking and the rest of you typing. So I'm just going to find the chapter heading.
Okay. Is it a possibility that Uncle is just doing this to everybody? Like, he's the villain, because it's like when you don't see the same person,
you mean like
in the same place. Yeah, so he's the one that's secretly sneak off and doing it, and that's why it never happens when he's there, because it's like he's here, and maybe he's the shithead, and he's the real villain of the story.
That's a reading nobody's ever come up with. I mean, usual argument is this is a built narrative, and there's no sense of the conspiracy of the narrative is that there probably wasn't so much haunting, and it wasn't that coherent. I think if it was. But then, if and this is assuming that the events that the narrator is narrating are not all that accurate. So that would be my guard against that theory. But I love the idea. I love the idea that he's got this mask on the rest of the time, and then the kids come in and find him, and he's like, I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you pesky kids.
That's it, yeah. But, it's like, have you ever seen him and the ghost in the same place at the same time? I bet not.
Well, it's certainly worth thinking about. I mean, maybe, and although it does put him out if you think about it, because what gain does he get from everybody being scared of his dad? I mean, it means everybody comes and stays at his house and eats his provisions, which isn't ideal. Unless
they bring provisions with them. They could all bring a little bit of something, and he's
unless he could use it to curry favor later. Like, oh, you protected us from the ghost. Yes, please, have all my things. Have my daughter in marriage. All this kind of advantage that people would get. I don't know. I mean, I would love to submit that theory unofficially and see what happens.
No, you officially submit it under your name. It's all right. I'm giving you it.
Thank you very much. I think I might leave it to you. I'm not sure I agree with it, but I don't know. I just, something tickles me about him sort of creeping out of the house and going, and then watching people run away and going back in and say, it's fine. It never comes when I'm around. And then just reaping the benefits. So
nothing with humans ever surprises me.
No, doesn't surprise me either. So, okay, I'm just trying to find, Volstead was soon left deserted. This is a farmstead, because Torolf had begun to haunt the place again as soon as Arnkel was dead. This is chapter 63 of the saga. This is way, way in the future. It comes back.
Okay.
It's not even immediate. It's. I told you it was like Coronation Street. Things just pop up out of nowhere because they've happened about 50 episodes ago. So the farmer at Ulfarsfell went to Karlstead to complain to Thorod about his trouble. He declared people thought Lamefoot would not stop until the entire fjord district was deserted by both humans and livestock, unless steps were taken against him. So on the following morning, this is Torod, the farmer in the district, had his horses brought. He summoned both his manservants as well as people from the neighboring farms, and they rode onto the headland and towards the mound of Thorolf. And they broke open his burial mound and found him in it, and his body was still undecayed and most troll-like in appearance. He's still not gone.
That is such a common thing with ghosts. I mean, I can't say I've never dug up somebody who's haunting, so I can't say whether it's a real thing, but you see it very often in popular culture, in TV shows, movies. Whenever you get this kind of haunting and they dig them up, they're often still quite whole, a bit wrinkly, a bit rough.
Yeah, I think the idea, stuff being done to a body to preserve it unnaturally. I mean, I would think of even sillier ones like The Mummy, for example. That's a hell of a movie, and I love it. But it's all in the preservation of how his body is that it keeps him, and he's still juicy when they lift up the lid.
Yeah, that just reminded me. I heard today, and this might not be true, but I did hear it, so I'm going to put it out there. Apparently Egyptian scholars are asking people not to use the word mummy anymore, and they want to use the word mummified person, because mummy is derogatory towards the person who is being mummified.
Right. Yeah. So I can see that. All right. In that case, a mummified body.
So the film's going to change the title.
Well,
Brendan Fraser's just
to be fair, they are all the people who go looking for that body are, it's very colonialist, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess it's, although I do love it. Brendan Fraser in that movie is one of my favorite things ever. And Rachel, what's her name? I can't remember her name, saying, I am a librarian. Vice, that's right. So I used to be a librarian. This was my storytelling history. So this was like my battle cry whenever I watched the movie. I am a librarian. She gave me permission to be proud of it. It was nice. So the body is described as black as hell and as big around as an ox.
Okay.
Which is impressive. Black as hell being the goddess of, obviously, Niflheimer, the lady who is the child of Loki, and she's sort of blue-black and bruised looking, or some popular depictions of her have one half of her whole and hearty, the other half of her decayed and black and blue, and as big around as an ox. So that's, when you think of a grown man compared to an ox, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. But that's common. That's common with bodies. They swell from the gases and that kind of thing anyway.
Yeah, they do. I mean,
obviously not that big.
No, I mean, this is no doubt some, as we were saying last time, I mean, Matthias was very amused last time and said, so they exaggerated. Like, no, of course they exaggerated. Yeah, this is classic narrative exaggeration. And yes, corpses fart as well for this reason, which I imagine is very, very amusing if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, but not particularly great if it happens at a funeral. When they tried to get the body out, they were unable to budge him. I'm not surprised. Thorod had them shove a piece of wood underneath him, and by that means
I wondered where that wood was going then. For a second I was like, where the fuck am I putting that?
I mean, you're right to wonder. I mean, the whole chopping off a dragon's head and putting it between his ass cheeks is common practice. So, but yeah, that's really got to be right after you kill it. We've gone beyond the point where putting his head there will, solve anything. We need to take more drastic measures. So they prise him up a bit like an oyster out of a shell with this piece of wood, which is not a nice image. And then they trundled him down to the beach. They piled up a large heap of wood, rolled him onto it, and set it on fire. They let the wood and Thorolf burn to cold ashes, but it was a long time before the fire took hold of the body. And there was a strong wind blowing, and the ashes were scattered far and wide after the fire had begun to burn. But they raked as much of the ashes as they could out into the water, and after finishing this task, they rode home. Why do that with the ashes?
It just feels like a comical scene where they're just. I feel like it's almost a comedy of where I guess you can imagine when, as macabre as it is, like when if somebody kills somebody for the first time and they try and get rid of the body and they have no idea what to do. And I imagine as macabre as it is, it would be a comical moment where they're like trying to cut it up and then there's a bunch of blood, it's not going right, and there's a mess everywhere, and they're trying to clean it up, and it's spreading, and it feels like that kind of scene. They're trying to burn it, the ashes are going everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, this is classic comedy, black comedy stuff. Like it's so you know What We Do in the Shadows, where Sophie, an episode of this to be being the murderer. Yeah, he'd totally be trying to shove the body in a bin and not fitting the legs in. But it's kind of dark humor, and it's where one of the vampires keeps hitting the big, I think it's the carotid artery by mistake. And so instead of getting a nice, just being able to drink the blood, it sort of goes like a geyser, and he chokes himself on it, and it gets all over the furniture, and he's kind of a dandy vampire. So he doesn't want blood all over his nice couch. And it's kind of funny, but of course it's awful, but it's so funny. Yeah. What somebody in the chat said that was to do with burning fat and damp, and that's a fairly normal explanation. A half-decayed corpse, or one that's a bit old and soggy, plus a fire. I mean, humans. This is what's so dreadful about any humans that are burned alive. Like it takes a long time for a human body to really catch fire, and it's not merciful at all. You'd be there waiting and screaming before the fire even reached the vital bits of you, and it's horrible. But yeah, luckily this one's only undead. I
think that you suffocate before, because I think when the fire's so close to you that it's just sucking up all the oxygen, that you suffocate before. Yeah. I mean, it's not nice, I think you suffocate. No, I think you suffocate a lot quicker than like.
I think it depends on the day. If it was a wet day, hopefully you would. And some people in old martyrologies, and some people would pay to have a gunpowder necklace put around their necks. And then that would blow your head off and save you the pain.
Wow. Yeah. What?
Oh yeah.
That's insane.
Oh yeah, it's insane, but it's quite smart. And it wasn't strictly allowed, but this was a sneak method of preserving a little bit of your, not dignity, that's too strong a word, but maybe ensuring your suffering doesn't go on too long.
And I guess it's almost taking back a little bit of control in the chaos.
I think it is. It's like anybody who, if they knew they were going to die in a horrible, messy way, would perhaps, if they had the means and they knew there was no going out, they would perhaps choose the easiest. And I can see that. Yeah, and it's why in The Handmaid's Tale, I mean, this is a very sensitive subject for everybody involved. So it's not to be taken lightly. I think what's so effective about dystopias like The Handmaid's Tale, one of the tells that tells you how bad that world is they tell you from the beginning, oh, we're not allowed curtain sashes in our rooms, we're not allowed to eat with forks and knives, we're not allowed this, we're not allowed that. And what you come to realize is this is any instrument which could be used to end your life by your own hand. So the implication is people want to. It's that bad. But that's very macabre, and this is more just classic goth scary, really. So guess what happens next? So we got to the ashes. The ashes are a very interesting thing, and they make sure they shovel them out onto the water. And obviously that's so that the burned ashes don't cause any damage. It's often emphasized that if they burn a body of an undead, they want to do it in a place where it's not going to affect any crops or livestock, because even that could have an adverse effect on what comes after it.
Okay.
Which is really interesting, I think. And obviously what happens is that, so I'm going to tell you the story of the cow. Yeah. The farmer returned to Karlstead late in the evening. The women then were busy milking. And when he rode up to the milking shed, a cow shied away from him and fell and broke her leg. They took hold of her, but she was too thin to make it worthwhile to slaughter her. Obviously, cow with a broken leg. Well, she's the first. I know it's mean on the poor cow, but the idea is that animal's likely to sicken. So if she's nice and fat, the sensible thing to do would be to kill her now, because she was going to probably go that way anyway.
Yeah.
But she's too skinny. So sensibly, they decide to get their money's worth and allow her a chance to fatten up and heal her leg. So they get the leg bandaged, but the cow then went dry, obviously all built up. And when the leg was healed, she was led up to Ulfarsfell for fattening, and there the pasture was as good as on an island. It's kind of nice and isolated in long, thick grass. So this is a good place for her to be out of the way and get her strength back. The cow often came down to the shore where the funeral pile had been and licked the stones on which the ashes had lain.
Oh no.
Oh no. Oh no.
Oh,
and it was said that one time when men from the islands came rowing up the head of the fjord with a boatload of dried fish, they saw the cow up on the hillside together with a dapple grey bull. No one knew there was such a bull in the neighbourhood. This is two separate things in a way. Just for anyone who doesn't know, dapple grey or grey sort of speckly animals in Icelandic, that's a classic sign of the uncanny. So you've got the same thing with horses as well. And if you've got that colour animal, you know it's likely to be supernatural. Or paranormal, if, like Armin Jakobsen, you prefer that term. So in the autumn, Thorod intended to slaughter the cow. But when the men went out to look for her, she was nowhere to be found. Surprise, surprise. Thorod often had her searched for that autumn, but she was never found. People assumed she'd died or been stolen. And early one morning, shortly before Yule, the herdsman went to the cowshed as usual, and there he saw the cow standing before the gate of the shed, and he recognized the animal as being the same one which had broken its leg and then had been lost. So she's waiting there by the gate, like she needs to come back in. And so he led her to a stall, tied her up. Cow's revenge. I mean, mind you, they haven't done anything terrible to her. They've just bandaged her leg and sent her off to eat grass.
Yeah, that's true.
Sadly, she has become the instrument for what is to come. It's a bit like Alien. They haven't done anything wrong. They just happen to have been in the wrong place at the wrong time.
She licked the wrong lot. She licked
the wrong rock.
She licked the why is that so hard to say? She licked the wrong rock. She licked the wrong rock.
Yes. Cow got face hugged. She sort of did. So they led her to a stall and they looked at the cow and they felt her with their hands. And they found that she was pregnant. And so she was unfit for slaughter.
Oh, she keeps tricking them. She keeps getting away with this.
Yeah, she gets away with this. So they'd already, the story says they'd already killed enough cows as needed for the winter stores anyway. So in the following spring, just before the beginning of summer, the cow had a calf. It was a little heifer. And after a while, she had another calf. So it doesn't say whether she's turned out to pasture in this meantime or she has the same partner. But either way, she has two offspring. And this was a bull calf. She had great difficulty bringing it forth because it was so large. And a little later, the cow died. So, yeah, it's a big one. And you immediately know that's bad news, especially if the mother dies carrying it. So this large calf was carried into the main room. It was dapple grey in colour. And the story says it was, but it was a good-looking animal. It was well worth having. So obviously they don't, for us it's bad news. According to them, oh wow, we just got a really big bull calf. That'll be a good stud. We can use that. Now both calves were in the room. So it does say. So it's a brother and a sister. Both calves were in the room. The firstborn one having already been brought in, presumably to protect them from the cold and just get them dried off. And because their mothers died. An old woman was sitting in the room. She was Thorod's foster mother, and she'd become blind in old age. In her younger days, she had been considered second-sighted, but now she'd grown old. What she'd said was regarded as senile chatter.
Okay.
That's typical. Freaking typical, isn't it? How often do we see that happen where intelligent men and women grow old and suddenly people start to infantilize them, especially women?
Yeah.
When the large calf was trussed up on the floor, so presumably it's either wrapped up in a towel or it's maybe they tie the legs together to carry it, it bawled out loudly, made a really loud moo. And when the old woman heard that, she became greatly frightened and said, "That's the voice of a troll, not a living creature. You need to slaughter this monster."
Okay.
Guess what happens next? Just hazard a guess.
They don't.
They don't. Of course they don't. No, they don't. Thorid says, "There's no reason to kill this calf. It's excellently fit to be raised. It'll make a fine animal when it was fully grown." And then the calf bellowed a second time, and the old woman trembled all over and said, "Dear foster son, do have this calf slaughtered. Misfortune will come to us if you raise it." He replied, "The calf shall be slaughtered if you so wish, foster mother." Then both calves were carried out, and Thorid had the heifer calf slaughtered and the other one taken out to the farm. He issued a warning that no one should tell the old woman that the bull calf was alive.
So, why bother killing either of them? Just kill neither.
I guess some truth in a lie, like omitting certain truths. Like if someone said a calf's been slaughtered, then it can have been slaughtered. Also, I think there's some emphasis on doing the wrong thing here. Like this is, he's killing the one that actually could have brought them some money, as it will turn out in the end. And he's making an idiot decision. However you read it, wrong decision. And he's treating her like an idiot. I would have listened to her. So the calf grew visibly day by day. So in the spring, when they were let out of the stable, it was no smaller than those which had been born at the beginning of winter. Yeah. Jimmy says, typical horror story, ignore all the warning signs. I guess for a horror story, you have to. It's part and parcel of the fabric, isn't it? Because it's our sensible thoughts that allow the silly things in, because we tell ourselves they can't possibly happen. Like I can't possibly do this. I can't possibly have that happen. But there's always a gap. It falls through and the impossible becomes possible. So there you are. That's something of the genre for you. He rampaged about the home field when he got out, bellowing as loudly as a fully grown bull so that you could clearly hear him in the house. Okay. Then the old woman said, "So that troll was not killed after all. Now more harm will come to us from it than words can tell."
She's not daft.
She's not daft. She's really not daft. The calf grew rapidly. By autumn, he was so large that few yearling steers were larger. And he had a good set of horns and was very handsome in appearance. He was called Glacier. It's sort of like, I guess the English term would be shiny or glossy. Kind of, he's very rich, good-looking coat. When he was 2 years old, he was as large as a 5-year-old ox. He was always kept on the farm with the milking cows. And whenever Thorid came to the milking pen, Glacier went up to him and sniffed at him and licked his clothing, and Thorid patted him. He's making a bit of a pet of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, having trouble turning my page. He was as gentle as a sheep among both men and animals, but when he bellowed, it sounded most frightening. And whenever the old woman heard that, she became terribly excited. Okay. But yeah, this is, I think Eunice is right here. It's sort of a false sense of security being built up here. As long as the bull is calm and gentle, you can't believe any danger will come from him. But the old woman's foreboding knows better.
Yeah, she knows. She's well aware of what's coming.
So when Glacier was 4 years old, rather than 2, he refused to go out of the way for women, children, or young men. So nothing can shoo him. He won't give way. And grown men went at him. He tossed his head and acted enraged. He retreated before them if he had to. But one day when Glacier came home to the milking shed, he bellowed so loudly that it could be heard as clearly indoors as nearby. Thorod and the old woman were in the sitting room. She sighed heavily and said, "You don't value my advice very highly, not having had that bull killed, foster son." "Very likely." So Thorod replies, "Never mind, foster mother. We're going to let Glacier live until fall and then slaughter him after he's put on some flesh during the summer." "Very likely it will be too late then," she said. "That remains to be seen," said Thorod.
There's always that one character, isn't there, that gives the warning that's just completely ignored.
"Don't build a dinosaur park. It might be dangerous."
The signs are all there.
What could possibly go wrong? While they were saying this, the bull bellowed, and it sounded more horrible than before. Then the old woman spoke this verse. So this is a translation by Lee M. Hollander, and I don't think it's the best translation of the verse, but shall I read it to you?
Sure.
"His head beats the herd's leader, hoary chieftain, bellowing, 'That bull fear I will be men's bane, with voice blood-curdling. To the grave will he teach you. Travel, I forewarn you. That ox ex-soons your life will end. I still see clearly.'" So that's the last bit, so clearly a reference to her blindness. She knows, even if she can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And Thorod replied, "That's nothing but doting old wives' babble. I don't believe you see that." She spoke this verse. "Always when the old one opes her mouth, she is doting. But I see gore from bloody belly dripping, say you, madly turning on mankind. Mark you my words, that brute will that sees the gear of the glittering gold rings be your death yet."
I mean,
fairly plain.
He's whatever happens to him next, he deserves it.
Kind of does. "That will not happen, foster mother," he declared. "Alas, but it will," she said. And that's the last we hear of it. During the summer, after Thorod had had all the hay in the home field raked, there came a heavy rain. Basically, long story short, the bull goes absolutely berserk and starts acting up in the hayfield and messing up things. They tell Thorod what he's doing. He snatched a big cudgel and he runs towards the bull. And when Glacier sees him, he stops and turns to him. He tries to tell him off and shoo him, but he doesn't move. Mm-hmm. And then Thorod raises the cudgel and he hits the bull on the head to make it pay attention, which seems a silly idea. And then he charges. And Thorod sort of succeeds in, he takes his horns and sweeps his head to the side, and he dodges him for a while, and he runs, and then he puts his arms around the bull's neck and tries to wear him out by riding him around. He jumps onto his back. And then nobody really dares to come and help with what they can't. It's like when you have two people with knives and you can't run in between them. There's no way of helping him. But then Glacier eventually just tosses his head so that Thorod's legs are thrown up into the air, and then he gets his head under the farmer and stabs him in the gut with one of his horns. It's essentially like a sword blow. And then he lets go, he runs over the river, and the men chase him all the way across to a swamp. And then the bull runs into the swamp and sinks down and never comes up again. And it's called Glacierkelder, Glacier's bog. It enters the ground like a demon from hell and never comes up. And then obviously Thorod is taken to the house and he dies of his wounds. And that's the end of Thorod's little narrative.
Well, she told him so.
She told him so. Yeah, women's foretelling. It is a common theme. It's not just women, it's men as well. But I think foresight was considered to be, from what I've read, there's a lot of instances of foresight from it being a special intuition of the female mind, that they can often sense bad things are going to happen. And I've got my own theories on that. I do think there is some truth in that if you are part of if for years and years you've been denied some powers, you're going to find your powers in another way. And I think it's nurture. People say, oh, women are better at this, that, and the other. And I don't think it's naturally so. I think it's because they've had to become accustomed to getting their power in other ways through reading people. say your husband's a chieftain, you're not actually going to command the land, but you can get a lot done based on knowing how his moods turn and knowing how to manipulate his moods, and knowing how to handle other people. So it's the sort of soft power, but it's very powerful nonetheless. And I think to some extent, foresight and sensitivity to events comes into, you could say it's foretelling the future. You could also say it's just common sense, reading how people are, reading how they're going to react to things. And some of this is her clearly knowing her son or her foster son, being like, well, you think this is a good idea, but you don't take enough care.
Yeah. There's a lot to be taken from it, because I'd be the pig-headed guy who was like, no, it'll be fine. Don't worry. I'll kill it when it's small, make a lot of money from it. It's gonna be perfect. I just ignore you, and I'd get what I deserved.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's something you see again and again. And I can't say I'm not guilty of that too sometimes. It's very easy to be confident and just say, oh, I'll get it done, and you put it off. But actually the thing comes back and bites you in the ass. Or in the case of Thorod, it comes and bites you in the abdomen quite deep and you die. So do you want to, shall we jump into ghost story number 2? Or should we have a short 2-minute break for people to just get themselves another drink? Or what do you want to do?
I think we should probably maybe save ghost story number 2 for next time. Have we gone
on for a while?
Oh, it's like an hour and a half.
Oh my God.
So we've been talking for a while.
Okay.
So I think we save it.
Yeah.
We save it for next time so we can do the Q&A for like half an hour, 40 minutes after. We can all talk about our own ghost stories. People can ask you some questions if they want, but I think we'll probably end up focusing just on our own little ghost tales.
Well, more ghost stories is always good. And the next one also involves a ghost animal. So I think it would be an interesting one to talk about. Sure.
Yeah, I'd rather than rush it, I would rather us have the time to explore it properly and go on our own little tangents and enjoy it and take time rather than kind of push through.
Yeah, okay, let's do that. So, that's the story of Thorolf Lamefoot and the Bull. And if you want to read Eyrbyggja Saga, you can. I think Penguin have copies of it now, so you can always swat up the next time. But if you want to leave it a surprise, maybe save the read, because I think the next one is a corker, and I'm actually I'm always pissed off that I didn't mention that one first, because I would have really liked to tell you about that.
No. There we go.
Oh, no. Thanks, Kim B. It's a couple of people having to leave now.
Oh, some okay. Yeah, let people know where they can find you, I guess. If you want people following you on social media, I don't know. Some people do, some people don't.
I don't do an awful lot on social media. I do Instagram. Sometimes I publish poems, but that doesn't tend to be via the internet, because they don't then let you have them anywhere else if it's already been on screen. So I'd say, Twitter is @ClarePoet, Clare_poet. Instagram is @Clarify. And that's spelt Claire without the I. So really it's just photos of occasional trips I do. And if I happen to go on academic conferences, I take snaps of all the countries I go to, which is always very nice.
That's always fun.
I can't wait to go back to Iceland.
Yeah. So like I say, we're going to jump over and do the Q&A after this. So if you do want to check that out, please just take a moment to check out the Patreon. It's just Patreon/Nordic Mythology Podcast. Again, the lowest tier is £3 a month. So it's 10p a day. And like I say, it's like buying me a cup of coffee, and it really does help keep the show going and help keep us growing. And Claire, I have an extra special little surprise for you after in the Q&A, because I've been promising a coconut bikini for a long time, and I feel like this could be the time. Oh, well, it is the time. So again, for people who followed us for a while, when we hit 200 patrons, I said I would do an episode in a coconut bikini. Obviously, it was supported by the patrons, so it's fair that it's for the patrons. So in the Q&A, when I rejoin you, I will have my coconut bikini top on.
Yes. And if he gets to 300, he's made a promise to actually get on an ash pile and dress as a pig. So you need to get some private. You said it. It wasn't me. So
did I say that?
Reminding you. You did say that.
I probably, I probably did. I probably did say that as well. That's the worst thing.
Yeah, you did. There's evidence on YouTube. Just that.
Okay.
Other people agree with me.
But if you enjoy the show, please leave a 5-star rating and positive review wherever you get your podcast, and also hit the subscribe button, whether it's audio or visual on YouTube. It lets you know whenever we drop any new content. And yeah, I think that's it. Obviously, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, just at Nordic Mythology Podcast. So yeah, let's go do a Q&A, and I will be less dressed, I guess. Thank you, Claire. We'll speak to you in a minute.
Speak to you shortly. Bye.